Inside the darkest corner of Nebraska's high-security prison system sits a man whose very name still sends a cold shiver through anyone who remembers the terror he unleashed. Nikko Jenkins. In this place, there are no whispers, no footsteps, no trace of another human soul. Only the steady echo of his breathing bouncing off unforgiving concrete walls. He spends every day sealed behind a thick steel door, cut off from the world he once walked through with violence and chaos. The silence that wraps around him isn't comfort. It's a sentence of its own. This is where Nikko has remained since 2013, after a brutal 10-day rampage left 4 people dead and an entire city shaken. Omaha still feels the aftershock of those murders, and the nation watched in disbelief as his courtroom behavior spiraled into something even more disturbing. But none of that compares to the world he now wakes up in. A world built from loneliness, confinement, and a mind that seems to unravel more with each passing day. And before we go any further, there's something you need to know. A lot of viral videos online claim that Nikko Jenkins has already been executed. That's completely false. He is still alive, still trapped on death row, and still living through a reality far more suffocating than any lethal injection. Those rumors exist for clicks, not truth. What you're about to hear is the real story, the one hidden behind layers of steel, silence, and madness. Each morning, Jenkins opens his eyes to the hum of a ventilation system that never stops and a fluorescent glow that never fades. There is no freedom here, no conversation, only the relentless noise inside his own mind. And as we step into his world, you'll understand why some call this justice, and others call it something much darker. The real descent for him didn't start with the sentence or the judge's final words. It started the moment the cell door shut with a metallic slam that echoed longer than anyone expected. That sound became the beginning of a new reality, one where the world outside stopped mattering and the world inside tightened around him like a fist. When he was processed into the system, officers already knew he wasn't going to be a standard inmate. He arrived with a reputation carved into every report. Unpredictable, violent, detached from reality. A man who lived half in this world and half in a place only he could see. From the start, they made a decision. He wouldn't join the general population. He wouldn't share space or conversation or conflict with others. They placed him directly into solitary, not out of punishment, but because no one could predict what he might do if given even a sliver of freedom. His new home was a concrete box barely larger than the reach of his arms. Cold, bare. A single bunk welded to the wall, a thin mattress that never softened, a steel toilet bolted in the corner. No window, no view, no sense of day or night, only the hum of fluorescent lights leaking through the cracks of distant hallways. Every morning followed a ritual. A guard approached without speaking, sliding a tray through the small rectangular slot in the door. The officer never lingered, never exchanged a word. The routine was mechanical because anything more felt risky. And every morning, he sat on the edge of the bunk, staring at the food, as though deciding whether it belonged in the world of the living or the world inside his mind. Hours passed without change. Sometimes he paced the short distance of the cell, counting each step under his breath. Sometimes he stood perfectly still, staring at the wall as if waiting for it to open. And sometimes he whispered to himself, conversations held with voices only he could hear. The reports written by officers described behavior that seemed to shift like weather. One moment he was quiet, withdrawn, almost invisible. The next moment he erupted in screams that shook the unit. He scratched symbols into the paint, tore his blanket into strips, or pressed his ear to the vent, insisting something was speaking to him from the other side. When psychologists visited, they found a man fractured in ways they couldn't easily define. He spoke about visions, commands, shadows that moved in corners. He insisted spirits watched him, followed him, judged him. They wrote notes about delusions, possible schizophrenia, severe personality disorder, and years of untreated trauma. But nothing in their assessments changed his reality. Solitary remained the only place where staff felt he could be controlled. 23 hours inside the small concrete room. 1 hour in a fenced pen outside. Alone. surrounded by razor wire and the watchful eyes of officers perched above. Even that hour didn't resemble freedom. It was a different cage, one where the sky felt more like a ceiling than an escape. Over time, isolation didn't calm him. It amplified everything. The silence in the unit wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. The lack of contact didn't soothe his mind. It fractured it further. Days dissolved into each other. Nights stretched forever. He talked about time slowing down, about minutes feeling like hours, and hours feeling like eternity. Guards began noticing changes not just in his behavior but in his appearance. His eyes looked hollow. His movements became sharper, quicker, as if reacting to things no one else could see. Some nights he pressed his forehead against the door for so long that a faint mark appeared on the metal. Other nights they heard him chanting, mumbling strings of words in patterns no one could decipher. And sometimes the entire unit went silent, not because he was quiet, but because everyone else stopped to listen. They said the way he screamed didn't sound human. The few mental health workers assigned to monitor him tried to make sense of his episodes. They recorded incidents where he harmed himself, tore at his skin, or scratched messages into his arms. They noted the strange drawings he made with whatever he could find, bits of food, smudged dirt, or his own blood. They tried medication. Sometimes he refused. Sometimes he agreed. Sometimes he said the pills dulled the voices he believed were meant to guide him. The only constant was that nothing lasted. Nothing improved. And nothing made him safer to handle. His isolation became the system's only answer. Even the staff who worked around him developed rituals. Never stand directly in front of the slot. Never open the door without backup. Never speak to him longer than needed. Protocol replaced humanity because humanity felt dangerous. Over the months, he became a ghost in the unit. Everyone heard him, but no one saw him for more than a few seconds at a time. He became a presence more than a person, a reminder of how fragile the mind becomes when trapped behind walls with nothing but itself for company. Somewhere along the way, he began writing letters. Not to family, not to friends, to officials, to courts, to anyone he believed could hear the messages he felt compelled to deliver. Some letters were coherent. Others read like riddles. Some were filled with claims of visions, divine punishments, or warnings about things only he could sense. Staff screened the mail, unsure if they were reading the thoughts of a man collapsing under mental illness or someone manipulating the system in ways they couldn't predict. The truth was that no one fully understood him, and perhaps no one ever would. What the prison didn't realize was that isolation wasn't containing him. It was transforming him, breaking him down piece by piece, shaping his mind into something unstable, volatile, and unpredictable. The person who had entered the system had already been deeply troubled. But the person who was emerging from years of solitary was something else entirely. He wasn't just a danger to others. He was becoming a danger to himself in ways no one could control. And the system, built to restrain, punish, and contain, never had the tools to reach the places where his mind now lived. This was no longer a prison sentence. It was a slow disintegration, a psychological unraveling inside a box where time lost meaning and sanity slipped away unnoticed. And no matter how many reports staff filed or how many evaluations were ordered, the truth remained the same. Solitary didn't silence the chaos inside him. It amplified it. And with each passing day, the cell door felt less like a barrier to protect the world from him, and more like a cage trapping him with the darkest parts of himself. What made his confinement even more haunting was the slow realization that the system around him had no real plan. They weren't trying to rehabilitate him or understand him. They were simply containing him, hoping the walls would do what treatment and intervention couldn't. But the walls weren't neutral. They pressed in on him in ways no one could measure. Every inch of the cell felt like it carried a memory, a voice, a shadow. Some nights he whispered to the air, asking for answers that never came. Other nights he argued with the silence, convinced it was speaking back to him. The guards who monitored him learned to anticipate the change in tone, the shift from quiet mumbling to explosive shouting. They followed protocol, documenting everything, But paperwork couldn't capture the intensity of the moments when he seemed completely consumed by whatever lived inside his mind. Even simple tasks required caution. When he was taken for showers, he was escorted by multiple officers, each one on guard for sudden movements. They described him as both distant and unpredictable, like he floated between two realities. Sometimes he walked without making eye contact, calm and compliant. Other times, he resisted every command, insisting unseen forces were pulling him in directions only he could feel. Mental health staff tried to maintain some form of connection, but he rarely met their eyes. He spoke in fragments, often trailing off into statements about visions, symbols, or messages delivered through dreams he believed were real. They documented each session, noting the widening gap between his perception and the world around him. As the years passed, the effects of isolation grew more severe. His sense of time faded until he could no longer tell morning from night. He described feeling like the days folded into each other, creating a loop that repeated endlessly. Even his body changed. Lack of sunlight drained his complexion. Limited movement made his frame thinner, almost fragile. Officers noticed his posture shift, his shoulders curving inward as if the weight of the cell pressed down on him. Reports mentioned incidents where he found ways to harm himself, despite the precautions placed around him. He once wrapped strips of fabric around his arms until the circulation stopped. Another time he scraped symbols into his skin, convinced the markings were protection. The facility responded by increasing surveillance, but surveillance didn't change the reality. It only gave them more evidence of a mind unraveling. For the officers, he became a figure discussed in careful tones. Some believed he was dangerous because of his volatility. Others believed he was dangerous because of the sheer unpredictability his mental state created. No one denied the fear that lingered when walking past his cell, especially on nights when he screamed long enough to shake the unit awake. The inmates who caught brief glimpses of him during transfers avoided eye contact. They whispered stories about him, turning his behavior into legend. Some claimed he was possessed. Others said he had lost his soul. In a place where darkness was common, his darkness felt different, heavier, something that made even hardened prisoners uneasy. Through all this, he wrote letters that filled pages with fragmented thoughts, declarations, warnings, and pleas. He wrote to courts, demanding they acknowledge what he believed were messages from beyond. He wrote to officials, insisting he was guided by forces they couldn't comprehend. Some letters were returned. Some were stored in files. None provided clarity. As legal battles dragged on, questions about his mental competency resurfaced. Evaluators were brought in. Some believed he was deeply mentally ill and incapable of understanding his actions. Others believed he was manipulating the system, using his behavior as a shield against the consequences of his crimes. But the truth was complicated. The man they evaluated wasn't the same man who had entered the prison years before. Solitary confinement had reshaped him, transforming his mind into something fragmented and unstable. He often contradicted himself, shifting between lucidity and delusion within minutes. Even when he tried to explain his thoughts, his words spiraled into detours about spirits, visions, and cosmic justice. The legal process slowed to a crawl. Appeals were filed, denied, reconsidered, delayed. Each hearing added another layer of uncertainty. For him, that uncertainty became torture. Death awaited him, but no one could say when. Could be years, could be decades. The waiting stretched endlessly, turning every day into another reminder that time had abandoned him. Death row wasn't a place of closure. It was limbo, a purgatory made of concrete and silence. Meals arrived through the same slot. Lights turned on and off with no regard for his internal clock. Guards spoke only when necessary. The world outside moved forward while his life remained frozen. Over time, his letters grew stranger, filled with cryptic claims about rebirth and divine transformation. He wrote about being chosen for a purpose no one else could understand. He insisted the gods spoke through vents, walls, and echoes. Staff screening the mail noted an escalation in his delusions, but they had limited options. Medication helped briefly, but he often refused it, saying it interfered with the voices he believed guided him. Every attempt to calm the chaos inside him felt temporary. No treatment could reach the parts of his mind twisted by years of isolation. Meanwhile, the public continued to remember his name. Documentaries, articles, online discussions. People argued about him, debated whether he was a monster or a symptom of a broken system. Some believed he was beyond redemption. Others believed he was failed long before he reached prison. Regardless of opinions, he remained locked in the same small cell, a man confined not only by the justice system but by the labyrinth of his own mind. The silence around him grew so heavy that even the guards felt it when they passed his door. They said the unit never felt normal, as if his presence altered the atmosphere. Some officers avoided the night shift near his cell. Others refused to linger during rounds. They all sensed the same thing. He was no longer just an inmate. He was a symbol of what happens when punishment becomes indistinguishable from psychological collapse. And through it all, he remained suspended between two worlds. Not fully alive, not yet condemned to death. Just waiting. Waiting for a system that moved too slowly. Waiting for a mind that tortured him. Waiting for an ending that never seemed to arrive. In the end, the punishment wasn't the sentence. It was the uncertainty. A life stretched thin across years of silence, isolation, and unanswered questions. And the most haunting part was that no one, not guards, not doctors, not the courts, knew what was left of him anymore. Nikko Jenkins once imagined that a death sentence would bring an end to the chaos that lived inside him. But what he faces now is something far more suffocating. A slow unraveling inside a system that keeps his body alive while letting his mind deteriorate piece by piece. No voices of comfort, no connection to the world outside, just the endless echo of time slipping by in a cell built to erase everything human. His crimes horrified Nebraska, but the life he lives today reveals a punishment that stretches far beyond any courtroom ruling. In the silent corridors of death row, he isn't fighting for redemption anymore. He's simply trying to survive the battle inside his own head. What about you? Do you see this as justice fulfilled, or as a descent into something much darker? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories from deep inside the system.